Okay, so thanks for having me. Appreciate it. My name is Chris Thorne. I'm the head of the immigration practice at Buchanan Ingersoll. My practice primarily is kind of in the business immigration side versus kind of what I call individual or personal immigration, but certainly, we kind of touch on that as well. So thanks for having me today. As we're thinking about kind of as you're thinking about your year ahead here as a business, certainly talent management is going to be more important than ever. So kind of when we say immigration, there's various, kind of aspects of that. And we're going to talk through, some of the changes about those aspects today. But, there's certainly the aspect of how do I attract and retain top talent, especially as the US workforce is changing and more folks in the workforce are requiring visa sponsorship. But then there's also the aspect of kind of global mobility. So how, do we move employees around the world, or, if we need them to go on a business trip to another country, are there restrictions related to that? Or, if we need to have someone from another country visit us here, are there restrictions related to that? So there's kind of that aspect of it too. So we're gonna talk through all of that, and there's a lot to cover in the 20 minutes because it's kind of amazing how much has already kind of changed. Just we're already just only in the beginning of February, so there's a lot to cover. But we'll go through it, and certainly we'll leave time for questions if you have any. So going on to the next slide. So what can we expect from the Biden administration in this year and in the coming years? I think originally there was a question, is immigration even going to be a priority? And I think there were some who felt that actually that wasn't going to be, a big priority for the administration. But that's actually turned out to be not the case. And we are seeing, in fact, that immigration is looking to be quite a big priority for the administration. Certainly a change in tone from the last administration, which was pretty clear and upfront about kind of reducing immigration into the US. So, I think we're going to see a more immigration friendly tone moving forward. I think it still remains to be seen the level of attention that business immigration is going to see. A lot of these changes in the first 30 days here relate perhaps to, less on the business side and more, creating opportunities for the dreamers, keeping the DACA program in place, changing, the asylum application process. So things that might not directly, on the surface be business immigration. However, as you'll see, some of these things, depending on the industry you're in, might open up opportunities for you to hire, labor that you need that you otherwise, weren't able to find in the market. So, I think we're going to see a change in tone. Immigration is certainly a priority, and we're already seeing that. Some of the changes are going to take time. So there was a lot that the Trump administration had put into place that, can't just be overturned overnight. So there are some rule changes right now that are still stuck in court proceedings. Some reversals are going to require formal rulemaking procedures. So, there could be a new rule that gets published that kind of rescinds an old rule, but that still has to go through public comment. There might be a 60-day period. So, things aren't necessarily going to happen very quickly, although we're already seeing that the Biden administration is very strategically using executive orders, presidential proclamations, and immigration agency memorandums to make changes quickly in some areas. So, the Trump administration was certainly using executive orders and proclamations, and now we're seeing that Biden is using them as well. And I think I read something that said he's even set to, have published more executive orders than proclamations than any other president. So certainly there's going to be a strategic use of those. Another thing that Biden administration published so far has been Executive Order 13993, and that directs the agencies to delay the effective dates of certain regulations that were published but didn't go into effect yet. So basically what the agencies have been asked to do is to delay the rules for 60 days, review them, and then issue any revised guidance as necessary. So there were some immigration related changes that, it was originally set to go into play in March. Now it's been delayed to May, but also the agency has been asked to review whatever the particular agency, whether it's Immigration Service, Department of Labor, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, have been asked to review those rules and decide, whether they'll still move forward, whether there's going to be new guidance, et cetera. So there is a lot that's kind of in flux still at the moment. So, it'll be interesting to see how things play out here in the coming months. But let's talk about some key changes that have actually happened so far. There was, I'm sure most of you are aware at this point, about executive order promoting COVID-19 safety in domestic and international travel. So this order and requirement became effective as of January 26th. So now international travelers entering the United States within 3 days before entering or boarding the flight to come into the United States need to be able to produce a negative COVID-19 test or proof of recovery. And that applies even for US citizens. So, that's a pretty extensive new requirement. Typically, US citizens have been exempted from restrictions in terms of entering the United States, but this is a new mandatory requirement. So as you're thinking about, this kind of plays into the global mobility aspect, as I was talking about. If you have employees, whether they're US citizens or foreign nationals on work visas, if they have to travel internationally, they're going to need to plan accordingly so that they meet, the requirements under this new order to re-enter. There's also been a proclamation which President Biden put into place on his very first day in office, revoking a travel ban for nationals of certain countries, and I've listed them here. In certain instances, it wasn't across the board. There were certain kind of scenarios and circumstances where if you're a national of one of these countries, you potentially were banned from entering the United States. So on a green card or immigrant visa, you may have not been allowed to enter the United States. And so now that travel ban is revoked. So to the extent, you had employees, who are working for you abroad, perhaps, and have been waiting to be able to enter the United States because they're from one of these countries, that travel ban is now revoked. Some more changes so far, and a lot of these are what I call putting a pause, hence the kind of graphic here. There's a DHS memorandum instituting a 100-day pause on deportations until the agencies review the immigration enforcement policies. There's going to be an end to the construction of the southern border wall and redirecting of funds. And I wanted to highlight some of these. They're not necessarily directly, maybe going to impact your business, but this is one that I think could. The preservation of the DACA program. So that is the program where a deferred action for childhood arrivals, where foreign nationals may have been brought here as children by their parents. Now they're kind of here as undocumented and they've overstayed their visa. That program does allow those folks to apply for work authorization. And, there was a question under Trump administration whether that program was going to go away entirely. And now it's clear that that program is going to be preserved. So I think the preservation of DACA could be key for if you're, on the webinar here and you have manufacturing plants or you're in agriculture. There are certain industries where some of your employees might be working on work cards, employment authorization documents under DACA. And it had been kind of unclear, what was going to happen with those folks. So, now I think it is clear that that program is going to stay, and perhaps there will even be a path to permanent residence and citizenship for those persons. So, I think that bodes well for businesses that are in certain industries where perhaps skilled labor are the folks that you're looking for, because there's probably going to be more opportunities to hire those folks and also less risk in terms of hiring people who don't have the appropriate work authorization. So I think that's good news for companies in certain industries. Other good news on the business immigration side is that Department of Homeland Security has decided they are not going to implement changes to the Immigration Service fee schedule. So there was going to be a rule that was going to pretty significantly increase the immigration filing fees. And so that was obviously going to have an impact if you do immigration filings. And, the fees were maybe going to go up 20, 30% in some instances, and sometimes even more. So, that's welcome news for businesses also, that the fee schedule that it is today is what it's going to look like for the foreseeable future. So one major change that is, it remains to be seen what's going to happen. President Biden sent an immigration bill to Congress called the U.S. Citizenship Act of 2021. Now, to be clear, this bill has just been sent to Congress. It hasn't actually been introduced by Congress yet, and this bill has not been passed. So, there's a lot of articles and stuff out there in the news kind of talking about some of these things. So I just wanted to be clear at the outset, as we talk through various provisions in the bill would still need to be introduced by Congress and passed. And my personal view is the bill as it's written today is likely not to be passed in its entirety. I think they're going to have to parse out certain pieces of this. And also, to be clear, the full text of the bill has not been introduced to the public. So some of the things we're going to talk through, it kind of remains to be seen what exactly is being anticipated. But I thought we could just kind of go over at a high level the things that are going to be proposed and ways it might impact your ability to attract and retain top talent in the coming years. So one of the things that's been proposed in the bill is to create a path to permanent residence and citizenship for certain undocumented individuals, for people who are in temporary protected status. So temporary protected status is that you normally would have to depart the United States because you no longer have a valid immigration status, but the United States is going to let you stay here because there are certain conditions in your home country, whether it's political conditions, even health and safety conditions, that we're going to allow you to remain in the United States until those conditions are no longer there. So that's TPS. So there's good, and immigrant farm workers. So again, depending on the industry you're in, that could be an opportunity for you, as I think more folks will, with actual lawful work authorization, will be in the market if, based on that provision, if it moves forward. There's going to be, there's a proposal for a clearing of the family-based immigrant visa backlogs. So right now, if you are trying to bring your sister or brother, to the United States and sponsor them for permanent residence, there's a huge backlog of 10, 15 years in some cases to do that. So we're not exactly sure how the backlogs are going to get cleared. So that's one area where the details are not exactly clear, but apparently there's a provision in there to help clear those family-based visa backlogs out. Increasing the number of diversity visas from 55 to 80,000. So the diversity visa is kind of like a green card lottery for nationals of certain countries. So it's not like employment-based, it's not merit-based. There are some requirements in terms of having a high school education, but it's really that if you're from one of these eligible countries, you literally put in a green card lottery to be able to come to the United States. So they're going to increase those numbers potentially. This is a big one. There's a provision in there to clear the employment-based immigrant visa backlogs and eliminate the per country caps. So right now, there's a limited number of green card numbers that can be issued each year. And so because of that, there are backlogs. There's just more people trying to get green cards than there are numbers available. Also, each country is given the same number, is kind of given the same number of green cards, regardless if you're India or you're Switzerland. So as you can imagine, India has is the country that has the most foreign nationals applying for green cards. So as a result, if you're born in India and your employer is trying to sponsor you for a green card, you might have a 10, 15, 20, 25-year wait to get a green card. Whereas if you're from a country like Canada where there's no backlog, maybe you can get it in 2 years. So under the Citizenship Act of 2021, the proposal is to eliminate the per country caps so that, Indian nationals wouldn't be overwhelmingly negatively affected by those caps. Now, what's not clear to me is, if they eliminate the per country caps, potentially for the next 10 years, the only people getting work-based green cards would then be Indian nationals, because the backlog is all with Indian nationals primarily and somewhat Chinese nationals. So, if you eliminate the per country cap, what does it do for the folks who are from countries where there is no backlog? So that's one thing I'm going to be curious to look at to see, while it seems very good on the surface to kind of clear out these backlogs and eliminate these per country caps, what kind of impact is that going to have for folks who are not from a backlogged country? And maybe it means that they're just going to kind of increase the numbers overall, which would be a great thing, but for business, but that remains to be seen. One of the other provisions is making it easier for STEM graduates to stay in the United States. So typically right now, if you're on an F1 student visa, you're getting this period of optional practical training after you graduate that lets you work for 12 months. And then if you have the STEM degree and you work for an E-Verify employer, you can extend that work authorization for 2 more years. But then at some point, your work authorization is going to run out and you typically transition to the H-1B work visa. Well, it remains, we're not quite sure what this is going to mean, but are they creating some pathway where potentially STEM graduates don't have to go to an H-1B? Like, is there going to be a different pathway, perhaps, that either allows them to go directly to a different type of work visa? So this remains unclear, but certainly if you're hiring, folks in the STEM areas, it is good news because, if this goes forward, it does seem like there's going to be a path for STEM graduates to stay here, and then that opens up opportunities for you. H-4 work authorization. So the spouse of an H-1B visa holder is an H-4, and under certain conditions, an H-4 spouse can apply for work authorization currently. But the Trump administration was looking to eliminate H-4 work authorization. So it seems pretty clear that H-4 work authorization is going to remain, which is great news because, again, you might have employees who are on H-4 work visas, or you have employees on H-1Bs and they're looking to have their spouses work, because you can imagine if your spouse can't work and you're looking to be a 2-income family, it can create real problems. And, so this is a great news that the H-4 work authorization is going to continue. There's a provision in there where apparently there's going to be incentivizations for higher wages for non-immigrant high-skilled visas. So we're not really sure what this is going to mean. It's seeming like if, employers are willing to pay higher wages, there's going to be some priorities that they're given, whether that's kind of in the green card process or in terms of getting one of the H-1B numbers. That's not really exactly clear, but just wanted to kind of highlight that, if you are paying higher wages for certain high-skilled visas, there's going to be certain incentives there. Under the current immigration rules, once a child reaches age 21, they're no longer, eligible to be dependents on the principal visa holder. So apparently they're proposing a provision to prevent that age out of children. And that, that can be a big problem because anymore, 21 years of age is, that's a young age. And basically the way the immigration scheme works right now, the child at that point has to have their own way once they become 21 to stay in the United States. Typically, they go to college and then they're an F1 student, they switch to that. But it looks like perhaps there might be ways that they're going to be allowed to stay in the United States for a longer period of time so that they don't age out. But again, we need to kind of see how that is going to play out in the final version of the bill. This is another, I think, important one on the business side. So there's a provision that would allow the Immigration Service to basically adjust the number of green cards based on macroeconomic conditions. So as it is right now, there's only 144,000 green card numbers on the employment side that are available each year. So, basically what this looks like is, if based on macroeconomic conditions, if it sets it up such that Immigration Service could open up more numbers if they feel that more numbers are needed. And this is another one that we're kind of waiting to see how it plays out. Biden administration would be seeking recommendations from the agencies for improving the employment verification program. So right now, as you all know, that's the Form I-9. You have a new hire, they complete the Form I-9. My personal view is that form, they make it seem like it's, the easiest form to fill out, but when you really dig in, there's so many opportunities to make mistakes on those forms. And even in terms of, especially when you're talking about foreign nationals and work cards and visas, there's so many, kind of rules and various nuances of, do they actually need the new work card in hand, or do they get an automatic extension of work authorization because they, filed to renew their work card? There's just so many rules that, in my view, I don't know how the Immigration Service expects really anyone to fully stay on top of and understand those. So it can be quite confusing. And then, of course, we also have the voluntary E-Verify program, where, after you're done the I-9, you put the employee's social security number into the system to see whether they're work authorized. So right now you have those two things, and, it's be interesting to see how they're going to improve that employment verification program. There have been rumors for a while that perhaps maybe they'll just do away with the Form I-9 and just go right to mandatory E-Verify, which actually does make a lot of sense to me. So we'll see, how all that plays out. But, hopefully the final version of the bill, we will see in the coming years here a more streamlined, easier to understand employment verification program. So just to kind of sum up in general about the provisions in this act, I think you can kind of see the bottom line is there's going to be more immigration and more people in the United States who have work authorization. There's going to be a focus on high-skilled visas, higher wages, folks in the STEM area. It should be, at the end of the day, hopefully easier to hire those persons and sponsor them for work authorization, which all bodes well. At the end of the day, this is kind of about attracting and retaining top talent. And again, I think more than ever with the pandemic, it's, so important. Talent management, talent acquisition is going to be more important than ever, continues to be important. So, having as many options available to you, is important. And it's actually more critical than ever if you do hire in the STEM area, for example, to really be working with Immigration Counsel to understand your options, because that can create a real competitive advantage for you, kind of just knowing what your options are, or knowing what it's going to take, 1 in 4 resumes potentially that come across your desk if you're hiring for a software developer or for certain engineers is potentially going to require visa sponsorship. That's how many foreign nationals are out there in the workforce requiring sponsorship. So really kind of having an understanding of the immigration, I think, is going to be more important than ever moving forward. So just one more slide here, and this isn't necessarily, these are just things I wanted to let you know, since we're all, gathered here, just on the horizon, things coming up, right away. So there was a Department of Labor rule, and there is a Department of Labor rule that is going to increase the H-1B and permanent resident prevailing wages quite significantly, possibly as high as 20 to 30%. This is one of those rules that was supposed to go into effect on March 31st or March 21st, and is now going to go into effect on May 21st, where the higher wage levels, though, will actually come into play on July 1. So this is one we're monitoring really closely to see whether this rule actually becomes effective or not. Because again, these prevailing wage levels are going to go up pretty significantly. So, we're waiting to see, is the rule rescinded or will revised guidance be issued? So just stay, closely on that, and I'll continue to monitor for MEA as well. Just to give everyone a heads up, the H-1B cap registration process Immigration has announced is going to run from March 9 to March 25 this year. And originally, it was going to be a new process this year where whether you were selected was going to depend on the salary level. So the highest salary levels were going to get prioritized. It was going to require technical changes to immigration services system, which they haven't been able to implement in time. So it is going to be a random lottery process again this year. So everyone's going to basically have the same chance of getting selected in the H-1B lottery again this year, with an additional 20,000 numbers out of the total 85 being reserved for foreign nationals that have advanced degrees from a US college or university. So again, where you'd be putting employees into the H-1B CAP registration process is if you have employees that are working for you as foreign national students on F-1 visas, working under optional practical training or OPT, and they would have presented a work card to you as their work authorization document, those folks are going to be looking to get H-1B sponsorship. So, now's the time to really be looking to see, do we have anyone working for us on OPT? And are we going to put them into the H-1B registration process this year? Because it'll be upon us before we know it. Again, it's March 9 to March 25. Another thing on the horizon that I wanted to just highlight is there currently is I-9 flexibility rule in place, which has been extended to March 31st, and I have a feeling will be extended even further. Right now, if your business is fully remote, you do not have people in the office, you do not have to personally inspect the I-9 documents. You can inspect them over a Zoom, you can have them emailed to you, you can have them faxed to you, and then when your business operations resume in office, then you still do have to do the personal inspection. But for now, you're allowed to review the documents remotely. Just keep in mind, on the I-9, normally there has to be personal inspection of the documents. Someone's coming to you, showing you the documents, because part of it is that you're looking at the documents to make sure that they appear genuine, to the person in front of you who's presenting them. But for now, if your businesses are fully remote, you can do the I-9 process remotely. Then once normal operations resume, then you still don't need to do the in-person process. If you do still have people going into the office, though, even if it's just periodically, then businesses are supposed to continue with the in-person I-9 inspection process. So again, that rule's been extended to March 31st, that flexibility, and basically they keep extending it. So I think it will be extended again, but for now, it's to March 31st. So these are kind of some things on the horizon, just in the very short term, and some of the other stuff, we were talking through, it kind of remains to be seen. The only other thing, and I know I'm at my time and I probably went over, so apologize for that, Amy and Kevin, but there still do remain restrictions for entering the United States after international travel if the person has spent 14 days in Iran, China, UK, Ireland, any country in the Schengen region, and now South Africa. So this wouldn't be for green card holders and it wouldn't be for citizens, but foreign nationals who've spent any time in those countries in the 14 days prior to coming to the United States either need to get a waiver to the restriction of entering under kind of what's called a national interest exception, or they need to get they need to spend 14 days in a country where there is no restriction. So, that is something important to keep in mind if you are having foreign nationals travel internationally, or, you have business visitors coming in. And that's actually one of the ways I've been working with MEA members quite a bit. They have either, they have global operations and they need kind of technicians to come in to do install and repair on equipment. I've helped them kind of get these national interest exception waivers, or perhaps you're in an area where you need to bring people in and they're going to be, working on pandemic related, COVID related work. That is a way perhaps you can get an exception, but certainly, it's had a big impact for folks trying to come in from Europe. Again, that restriction doesn't apply to citizens or green card holders, just foreign nationals. So that is, something else to, consider. Just looking, I have a couple questions here in the chat. Are we okay, Amy, Kevin, on time or?
Yeah, let me go ahead. I'll feed these to you if that's okay, Chris. We've got a couple of questions in the chat, and our folks are not shy about asking their questions. So
Good.
the first question is, and a lot of our folks are very concerned about the remote I-9 approval. So let's say you do a remote I-9 approval because everybody's working from home. But then before we all get back in the building, that employee quits or is fired. And so we can never do the personal inspection. Do you have any insight on that? Because normally we would be required to retain the I-9s, right?
Right. And remember, you will still need to retain the I-9 under kind of the retention rules. So it's the later of 3 years from date of hire or 1 year from date of termination. So you always on the I-9 want to tickler that date. I recommend like kind of just writing it in the top right corner and kind of organizing your I-9s that way. So each month you can kind of go through and figure out what to purge. But so again, even though they're terminated, you will still need to keep the I-9 for a certain period. Obviously, if you can't, they're not there, you can't do the in-person, I would just do a short memo to file, like super short, and just attach it to the I-9. Remote I-9 was completed under I-9 flexibility rule, employee left employment before normal business operations resumed. Like that simple.
Great.
But I would just
okay.
attach
And
that.
One other question, the L1 visa process, do you have a relatively short answer to that? What's the update as far as the L1 visa process?
Yes, there was a presidential proclamation under the Trump administration that was restricting the issuance of first-time L1 visas. So an L1 visa, just so everybody knows, in case you don't know, it's an intercompany transfer visa. So if someone's worked for one of your entities abroad for 1 year in the 3-year period, before you want to bring them here, then they might be eligible for this L1 intercompany transfer visa. So it's used a lot for like global assignments. The problem is that there was a presidential proclamation restricting the issuance of L visas. And that is going to run, it's still in place, but it is going to expire on March 31st. So my personal view is that is not going to be extended, that restriction. So I have a feeling starting April 1, companies will be able to, get L1 visas again. I mean, remains to be seen. That's just my kind of guesstimate right now, prediction. But I do think that I don't believe that the Biden administration is going to keep that proclamation going. I think the challenge practically, even if it goes away, is going to be getting a visa appointment at the consulate. Because, and this is kind of another update, all the US consular posts abroad have had suspended visa operations due to COVID, basically. And now they are starting to resume operations and appointments are starting to become available, but still on a pretty limited basis. So I think, as you can imagine, there's a lot of companies have been waiting to do L1 visas for folks. So I think the challenge practically is going to be getting an appointment. But, I think that hopefully answers the question on the L.
Yeah. Terrific. Well, thank you so much, Chris. You are always an amazing immigration resource for all of our members. We appreciate having you here. I'm guessing we're going to have you back in a couple of months to talk about whether or not that bill gets introduced and goes through and what those impacts might be. But in the meantime, if you're a member and if you have immigration questions, feel free to chat us in on hotline and we'll get in touch with Chris. Or if you feel like you have a bigger issue and you want to talk to Chris directly, we'll make sure his contact information is in the email that goes out this afternoon. All right, so thank you so much, Chris.
Thank you. I'll stop sharing my screen now.
All right, I'm going to go ahead.
Oh, someone just asked, and I don't know, I defer to you, Amy, on getting a copy of the presentation, but I can certainly send it to you, and in case you want to share that with
Yep, no, we will, the copy will go out this afternoon. There's going to be a recording of everything we talked about, and also the slides will go out with the email that goes out this afternoon.
Excellent. Okay.
All right.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of your week and day.
All right. Thanks, Chris.